Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a ton to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest communities on the YouTube platform when it comes to covering the Orlando Magic. So remember to hit that like, comment, and subscribe button along with hitting the post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. With all that being said, let's get right into it. Starting off with an Eastern Conference foe who might be making a slight move on the margins. The Boston Celtics are rumored, keyword rumored, to be potentially in play for veteran all-star point guard and former MVP Russell Westbrook. Now, for those who have been keeping up with the podcast, Russell Westbrook I thought would be a really interesting budget baller pickup off the bench for the Orlando Magic to throw out a potential veteran minimum, bring him onto the roster, be a big-time mentor to the point guard group that already has Jace Richardson, Anthony Black, Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane on the roster. It could be a really good figurehead in that locker room next to another veteran presence in Tyus Jones, but provides a completely different look. Tyus Jones provides a little bit more of the steady hand, the calm, get everybody in their right spots, while a guy like Russell Westbrook can come off the bench, be an initiator, a lead time scorer, and be a guy who can add to the pace of this team as a squad that's never really been in the top portion of the league when it comes to pace of play and getting things done in transition. So, for anybody who's been paying attention to the pod, I have been a big proponent of if the Orlando Magic were to free up a little bit more cap space, moving off of a guy like Jet Howard, for example, to go after a guy like Russell Westbrook in a no state income tax situation where you would be bringing him in on a veteran minimum to come play essentially for a year in a weakened Eastern Conference, come off the bench and have a really good chance to be a six-man of the year type of candidate for this young Orlando Magic team that a lot of people think could be a potential top three team in the Eastern Conference this year. It just seems like a pretty solid fit, but it sounds like there's a real conversation around Russell Westbrook going over to the green and white with the Boston Celtics. Now, obviously, this year things would be a little bit different with Peyton Pritchard being their main starting point guard alongside Anthony Simons. You having Jaylen Brown still healthy and Derek White, but Drew Holiday's gone. Kristaps Porzingis is gone. The likelihood that Al Horford is out the door is pretty skyrocketed, given the fact that it sounds like everything is pointing to him going to the Golden State Warriors. And of course, Jason Tatum will not be available for this year. I hate to see that if he had to come back to the Eastern Conference, of course he played for the Washington Wizards all those years ago, but if he had to come back to the Eastern Conference, I hate that he has to go to the Boston Celtics. I feel like it would be a wasted year. Yes, he would be able to build up his value a little bit more by playing on a team that essentially is playing with house money this year. A team that if they make the playoffs, good for them, but a team that if they were a top team in the lottery would also not be very mad at it, given the fact that they get to bolster their talent in a much more cheap way for a squad that is already so expensive that they had to let go of so many guys this off season, right? So hate to see Russell Westbrook go to the green and white and give them that benefit of getting such a still, I think, high-level point guard, specifically on the offensive end. I think he still provides a certain level of juice, a certain level of energy, and particularly when he's okay coming off the bench, which we've seen him grow more naturally in that role, whether it's with the Clippers or whether it was with the Lakers at the time, of being a guy who could come off the bench and be an energy dude for you. The Boston Celtics is a good situation for him, but I think it doesn't maximize the chances of Russell Westbrook being able to, win a championship before retirement. I think that a team like Orlando would be a little bit better of a fit. Yes, they're a younger roster. Yes, they're more, quote unquote, a team on the rise, but they're much more stable than the LA Clippers were. They're a much more stable situation than what he was linked to with the LA Lakers. And the Boston Celtics know that this is kind of a throwaway year, to say the least. So, hate to see it. Really wish that Russell Westbrook were coming to Orlando, but nonetheless, sounds like he still might have a job in the league going into the 2025-26 season. And personally, as a big fan of him at the point guard position, I can say that I'm definitely happy to see that we'll still be seeing another year of him on the NBA floor. You guys let me know in the comment section down below. How do you guys feel about Russell Westbrook potentially joining the Eastern Conference as a member of the Boston Celtics? And what are your thoughts on his fit with the Orlando Magic? I think I've asked this every single time that I've brought him up on the podcast, and I get mixed reviews, but I genuinely believe that Russell Westbrook would be an interesting fit. Is he the same caliber of other players we've discussed, like getting Malik Monk, who I think is like the ideal perfect fit? for this team as a six man off the bench? No, it's not exactly the same, but I think the energy level and also veteran presence that he provides on for this young Orlando Magic team is something that could be super useful. But nonetheless, it sounds like the Magic are the least likely team that Russell Westbrook will end up on if he is to play in the 2025-2026 season. Next up, let's talk about an interesting report which gives a little bit more understanding around why this Jonathan Kuminga situation got to where it's gotten to, being that now they are in an extreme stalemate with their contract situation. The likelihood that he signs the qualifying offer is getting closer and closer to being a set in stone choice because, let's be honest, they have to get something done before the actual year starts. Him signing the qualifying offer practically makes him untradeable, but him signing for the kind of contract it sounds like he's competing for, or it sounds like he's not necessarily competing for, the one that he's pleading for is one that also could potentially make him untradeable because of the cost value of it. That all stales back to a decision made on the 2021 draft night, which they chose Jonathan Kuminga over Franz Wagner. Reports say that everyone in the Golden State Warriors brass wanted Franz Wagner over Jonathan Kuminga. But the voice of quote unquote reason, I guess you could say, or the voice that pretty much was louder than all others, was owner himself, team owner, team commissioner, Joe Lacob. Let me read the actual report. It says Wagner went to the Orlando Magic with the 8th pick and has gone from strength to strength in his NBA and international careers ever since. Of course, this is after the Warriors decided to go with Kuminga 7th overall. It says, however, as per ESPN, the decision to draft Kuminga instead was a direct result of team owner Joe Lacob's influence. As it turns out, Bob Myers, the team president back then, and Mike Dunleavy, the current GM, who was then the assistant GM, had collectively given the green light for Wagner out of Michigan. However, despite the figures preferring Wagner alongside multiple other members of the coaching staff, Lacob remained firm in his support of JK, which has been true ever since. Again, leads to where we are now. 2 seasons back, Lacob was unwilling to include Kuminga in a proposed trade for Alex Caruso, who was playing for the Chicago Bulls back then. Chicago Bulls end up still making a very similar choice for a guy who's up for contract, instead going with Josh Giddey, who signed for $25 million. Good job by the Bulls, by the way, who haggled with him. He was looking for 30 to 35 million. They were able to bring him down a little bit. 25 might still be a little hefty for a guy that we don't know if you're if you're a Chicago Bulls fan, is truly a lead point guard in this league. But last year was a breakout season for him, enough to get him paid this summer. The article goes on to say further, Lacob was reportedly glowing about Kuminga's performance back in May after he finished as the team's leading scorer in the second round of the playoffs against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The two were then seen attending a Golden State Valkyries game together, where Lacob had asked Kuminga to keep an open mind about a future together. This suggests that the current stalemate has come despite the constant support the Warriors owner has shown the 22-year-old. Unfortunately, whether that eventually results in an extension being signed remains to be unseen. In other words, the Orlando Magic dodged a bullet, because I feel much better as a Magic fan with re-upping on what you have been able to see in Franz Wagner's development. Remember, this is a guy who had a tough summer league when we first drafted him. There were real questions around him being picked 8th overall, especially with Jonathan Kuminga being on the board at that time. 7th overall, especially with Jonathan Kuminga being on the board at that time, being considered as the next Jaylen Brown out of the G League Ignite at the time was the comp. And this is a situation where now Wagner not only has developed more into a steady hand at the small forward position for the Orlando Magic, but I also think he fits the mentality of what the Orlando Magic are trying to build moving forward. And even more so, of course, hindsight is 2020, but I think the fit between Wagner and Paolo Banchero is much better than the fit between what Kuminga and Paolo Banchero would look like. In a weird way, I actually think Kuminga would overlap too much with what Paolo Banchero brings to the table, as opposed to Wagner, who I think's ball handling ability on the perimeter is a little bit more sure-handed. I think he's a much better decision maker, a much better ball handler, and a much better ball mover, which makes for a little bit more space between him and Paolo Banchero, as opposed to Kuminga, who I think is much more more dependent on ball, a guy who focuses so much on slashing that he can tend to occupy the paint a lot more, and not as good of a ball mover, which puts Paolo Banchero in positions where he's going to have to settle into different situations than the ones where he can get his best looks and overall best opportunities, which I think is a big strength for him over the first few seasons of his career where he's been an all-star caliber talent. Another thing about that with Kuminga is that I think this goes to show you that system fit matters so much more than simply dragging on uh drafting based off of talent, right? Kuminga, I think from a talent perspective, is still maybe a better overall basketball player than Franz Wagner if we're going strictly off of talent and assets, right? We're talking about athleticism, we're talking about physical traits, right? If we're going based off of those things, not basketball IQ, we're talking about physical traits and just overall what translates to like the NBA from a hyper athletic standpoint, right? You look at Jonathan Kuminga in the same light as like the raw prospect Anthony Edwards was coming into the NBA. Now, Anthony Edwards, I think, was further along as a decision maker, and I think was much further along as a three-point shooter. That's developed over the last couple of years, and last year, he led the entire league in three-point attempts and three-point makes, which was a big step forward for him, and something that I don't think Jonathan Kuminga has been able to step into or embrace, which I think would have made this decision for the Golden State Warriors a lot easier had he taken those steps forward. I think this goes to show you that the Franz Wagner pick is one that not only is a representation of good management for the Orlando Magic to make that move, but I think it's also a good understanding of Franz Wagner to realize what he needs to do to fit in the NBA and stick, as opposed to Jonathan Kuminga kind of wanted to just come in there, hoop, play next to the Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and just kind of be in the mix as this hyper athlete guy who's going to just will his way into 20 points per game, and that's just not the Warriors system. And now it's rearing its ugly head because now, since he doesn't fit what their agenda is, he's one of those guys left at the table when the musical chair stopped who still hasn't been paid. Cam Thomas is betting on himself. Josh Giddey got paid. Quentin Grimes, we're still waiting to see what happens with him in the Philadelphia 76ers, but it seems like they should come to some kind of conclusion before the start of the NBA season. And Jonathan Kuminga could be entering training camp without a lucrative deal and may not even attend training camp until some kind of deal is come to, whether that's picking up the qualifying offer or, of course, them coming to an agreement. So shout out to the Orlando Magic. It's a couple years due, but Wagner is signed long term and his deal was done a year ago. On the other end, Kuminga still at the negotiation table. W for the Orlando Magic, who have dodged a little bit of a diva scenario and have got themselves a really, really solid pick who fits what they're trying to build. And Wagner's going to be set for a big time season this year. Kuminga, on the other hand, is playing to stick when it comes to the NBA landscape right now. Playing to stick. Next up, something that I thought was a little bit of a feel-good story was on Paolo Banchero's recent YouTube video. He posted on his YouTube channel. You guys can check that out. Paolo Banchero on YouTube. He posted a video, of course, focusing on him working out, offseason, getting himself together. Looks in really good shape, by the way, which is a good sign for him with two weeks to go before training camp. And a particular quote came from the video in which he says, "I think I can really take it to another level this year. Really just more motivated than I've ever been. I'm still figuring it out how disciplined you have to be great. The more of a routine you have from day to day, working out at the same time, it's important that I'm there every day, locked in with a focused mindset." And that's the title of the series for what should be it seems like a pretty long episodic series for Paolo Banchero entitled Mindset. I think that's a really good focus word for a player like Paolo Banchero coming into this season, right? There's a lot of noise around the Orlando Magic this year. They're going to be a top 10. They're going to be a top 10 offense this year with adding Desmond Bane and Tyus Jones to help uplift their three-point shooting. Paolo Banchero is in conversations as a preseason MVP candidate. The Orlando Magic should potentially finish as a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. There's real expectations for them to get not only out of the first round, but to make it a really deep run through the second round and put pressure on the Eastern Conference to potentially even make the Eastern Conference Finals, given the fact that only the New York Knicks and the Cleveland Cavaliers are really picked above them in many power rankings, right? So there's a ton of expectations on the Orlando Magic, and a typical young player would be overwhelmed by the expectations with the thought of kind of like feeling themselves and kind of over listening into the hype and allowing themselves to be drowned by all of the expectations and all the overall hype around their team and their individual projection this upcoming year. Instead, it sounds like Paolo Banchero is very focused on just maintaining the proper grind, maintaining the focus to step up in the ways that meet the requirements for this team to be as good as they can be, as good as they look like they can be on paper. Paolo Banchero obviously is the most important player on this team. He is the franchise cornerstone, and next to Franz Wagner, he is the guy that he is the guy who stirs the drink. He is the guy who makes this team go in a real way, right? When this guy is humming offensively, particularly, this team is just in a different space because he gives them a chance to win with how dominant he can be as an on-ball force, right? And I think that as he continues to develop as a three-point shooter, continues to develop as a decision maker with the ball in his hands, and he becomes a guy who I think continues to embrace this number one role with the Orlando Magic, it will only further open up the fact that he is a guy that should be, and I think by the end of this season will be considered as a top 15, top 10, top 15, no later than like top 20 player, right? He was already considered, I believe, on the latest ESPN and Bleacher Report rankings, they placed him around about 24 to 26. I think this is a guy who by the end of the season is going to crack the top 15 comfortably, and I would not be surprised if we're having real conversations about him as an MVP. I'm glad he's not laying into the hype. I'm glad he's not letting that overwhelm him, and I'm glad that that's not consuming the focus of what this upcoming season looks like, given the fact that the landscape of the East allows them to quote unquote have bigger fish to fry, right? Winning MVP, being top three in the East, that stuff, it's good precedent setting for this team moving forward as a young squad that's continuing to try to build in the right direction. But the goal is to win a championship, and with the landscape of the Eastern Conference right now, there's never been a better chance for the Orlando Magic to make a run, whether that's with Paolo or any other version of the Orlando Magic dating back to the years of Dwight Howard. This is one of the best opportunities for the Magic to make a real postseason run, and that needs to be the number one focus of Paolo Banchero. And so far, it sounds like it is, and that's a good sign going into a season where he has a chance to be really, really special. So again, check out that video on his YouTube page. Again, Paolo Banchero on YouTube. It's the most recent YouTube video entitled Mindset Episode 1. Really good watch and another good glimpse into the mind of an up-and-coming superstar. If you guys liked series like Quarterback or Receiver on Netflix, or the Starting Five series on Netflix with Anthony Edwards and Jimmy Butler, Domantas Sabonis, and LeBron James, those guys. If you're interested in that type of stuff, check out these YouTube channels with guys like Paolo Banchero. I believe Jalen Williams has one as well. Tyrese Halliburton has one. A lot of these players have their own YouTube channels with these kind of series. And it's a really good insight into not only learning more about the player that, tends to be like one of the leaders of your favorite franchise, but it also gives you just a glimpse into the mind of NBA players developing on a year-to-year basis. And the younger the player is, the more the interesting the developmental process is, because you see them kind of grow before your very eyes, as opposed to some of these more veteran players. They're established, they found their footing within the league, and the idea now is just kind of showing or depicting what the grind really looks like as a player that's trying to win a championship or take that, that career cementing step, as opposed to these young players who are still carving out their names in the NBA like Paolo is. So again, definitely a really, really great watch. Thought it was a solid video, and one a series that I think I'll be keeping up with, and I think Orlando Magic fans should keep up with as well. And lastly, we have ESPN with another rankings that dropped. Tim Bontemps and a handful of other ESPN writers contributed towards what was ranking all 30 teams' futures, with the Orlando Magic being placed at number 7. And there were a couple of different criteria categories that they utilized as well, being players, money situation, draft capital, market, and management. So what does that mean? Players, of course, means the active players on the roster and who is signed to long-term contracts moving forward. Money is obviously related to their cap space situation and their flexibility long term in terms of what they can do within the cap machinations. The closer you are to the second apron, the worse off you probably are within this category. Draft has more to do with what kind of draft capital you have, less of what kind of draft picks you have, because of course you can't really determine what kind of draft picks a team has in 2031 in 2025. But if they don't have any draft picks in 2031, that could hurt you significantly for a team that could really use the capital around that time 6 years from now, right? Market is exactly what it sounds like, where they're based in, things like no state income tax, things like attractiveness to NBA players. Where do NBA players congregate to in the offseason? Where would NBA players value their time the most, depending on whether or not they're a veteran player or a young player looking to get more playing time, things of that nature. And then, of course, management is the owner and front office and their primary focus, which is, are you looking to win a championship? Are you looking to just make it to the playoffs? Are you trying to be a team that at least is in the play-in tournament mix every year? Are you a tanking team? Those are a bunch of different things that were taken into consideration. For the Orlando Magic, they were ranked 7th in the NBA futures rankings they were ranked 6th in players, 27th, so third worst in money. Fair enough. They have 4 players practically taking up the entirety of their cap. Draft capital is 24th, again, similarly to the cap situation. They traded a lot of first round and second round capital to go ahead and get Desmond Bane. Market, 15th, middle of the pack. Yes, they are based in Florida, no state income tax, similar to the Miami Heat. And then management was actually 13th, which is also really good as well. The reading for ESPN says the Magic traded for Desmond Bane and signed Paolo Banchero to a 5-year extension over the summer. However, those transactions have Orlando holding steady in this spot from last ranking. They were actually ranked 7th last year as well. Orlando is maintaining its ranking because it's 27th in money and 24th in the draft. In the next 3 seasons, the Magic are committing $450 million in guaranteed contracts to Bane, Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Suggs. They also have only one future first in 2032 that they are allowed to trade in the next 7 years. So understandable, right? The main core of Paolo, Franz, Jalen, Desmond, Anthony Black, Jace Richardson, Noah Penda. To a lesser degree, I would say Wendell Carter is still within this mix. To a lesser degree, Jonathan Isaac is still in this mix, right? From a talent perspective, built well. But when you only have one draft pick that you can attach to any potential trade situation, it makes moving off of guys like Isaac or Jet Howard or even Goga Batadze to a lesser degree a lot more difficult, because you can't incentivize teams with anything more than just the talent itself on paper. But beyond that, they are well managed. They are in a space that should be, attractive to free agents when they do have the open cap space, when guys like Tyus Jones or Mo Wagner, or if you create cap space by moving off of Jonathan Isaac and or Wendell Carter Jr., there is real flexibility for this team where if they can make the money work, guys may want to come to Orlando because they're a team on the rise. They're in a state with no state income tax, which makes the value of contracts a lot more lucrative, as opposed to going to your LAs of the world or going to somewhere like Seattle or not Seattle, but like a Portland or anywhere like that, right? And then from a management standpoint, this team knows how to draft well. They're moving with a proper philosophy. They just made 2 really solid coaching hires that should help in the developmental process of this young team. And they're moving in the right direction. Some of the teams that are above them, I won't name all of them because I don't want to give the entire roster, I don't want to give the entire list away. An interesting one on this list is the LA Clippers, who are just set to have a lot of money after 2027. That's one of their biggest ploys on this list, is that they have an owner in Steve Ballmer who has a lot of money. Whether he uses it in the right way or not is a totally different question, but they have a lot of money. They also are going to have 11 of their 14 players essentially come off the books after 2027, which makes them really flexible as a team that could start over 2 years from now. And they're in a situation where if the Kawhi Leonard thing falls apart, they still can kind of put things together over the next 2 years. While having one of the better stadiums in the NBA with the new Intuit Dome and a franchise fan base that really stands behind them. Interesting team on the list. Another team that I thought was really interesting on this list was the New York Knicks, a team that seems pretty old, but also is pretty well established and has a good financial situation ahead of them as well. And of course, the two teams that stand out the most are in the Western Conference. You probably know who they are, but check out the article yourself to read the reasons why. But two teams in the Western Conference that kind of seem like they have the future of the NBA on lock, whether it's because of their litany of draft picks, their insane draft hit rate, or the fact that, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, they might happen to have a former MVP slash reigning MVP on the team. So, with that being said, thought that was a really interesting article. Again, check that out at ESPN's future rankings. I believe Tim Bontemps and some other ESPN writers all contributed towards putting the list together, and it's actually a really good read. And it also makes you think about things beyond just the talent on the floor. It makes you take into consideration things like what their cap flexibility is, what their draft cupboard looks like, and things of that nature. Just talking about a team's future based off of how they look right now and what the contracts of the players on the roster right now is a very minute way of envisioning how your favorite team can continue to grow or actually regress based on their circumstances. So taking into account things like management, money, location, it's a really interesting way to evaluate teams, and I thought this article did a really good job of doing that. But with that being said, this has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Again, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. And I will see you again tomorrow with some more news. But until then, peace.